Well, thank you everyone for being here and welcome. And I'd like to especially thank our great mayor, Mayor Lyles, for hosting us. And it's really been terrific. It was a suggestion of this board that we take our meetings outside of the Beltway, and I think it was a very good one because we got to see, and thank you to our other board member, Barbara Humphreys, for showing us just an amazing tour of Siemens USA and the facility we witnessed this morning. So it was a great experience all around. Thank you, Barbara. And to the rest of the board members, we very, very much appreciate your commitment, not only in this context, but the working groups have met over 6 times since the last meeting in March, and there have been rigorous layers of work beyond that. So we're very appreciative for the fact that everyone's rolled up their sleeves and is committed to achieving the bold agenda set out by this advisory council. I want to take a few minutes to update you on some of the federal actions that we've taken to advance these collective goals since we last met in March, and then I'll turn it over to Secretary Ross, who will give a brief update on the state of the economy and why it's so important that we remain laser-focused on inclusive growth for all Americans at a time when the market is roaring hot and we need to make sure that everyone is able to benefit from that reality and has the skills to advance themselves, to either come off the sidelines or to enhance and fuel the trajectory of their existing career. So Secretary Ross will share some information on that. But in terms of administrative and federal actions we've taken since March, we were very excited that at the end of the month, the administration issued an executive order to update the college scorecard. And we know many of you have made this recommendations, but what's really exciting is now the college scorecard will publish earning data, so the earning potential for students based on each program at every college. So rather than reporting on the scorecard of what the earning potential is at an institutional level, it will be on a program level, which allows people to make much more informed choices. The Department of Education has already begun implementing these reforms, and the scorecard now includes information for more than 2,100 non-degree programs. So we're quite excited about that, and we think it has the ability to be very transformative. The Department of Education also reached unanimous agreement on major reforms to higher education, notably on accreditation reform. This was the first time in over a decade that they've been able to achieve unanimous consent to reform. So it was a lot of hard work, but tremendous engagement and dialogue, and these reforms are critical and necessary and therefore being enacted. They'll specifically allow colleges to update their programs faster to reflect the changes in the marketplace and provide students a more relevant, demand-driven education. We've also expanded pilots to help incarcerated individuals obtain post-secondary education and skills training prior to returning to their communities so they are better prepared to enter the workforce. And we're really excited about this particular program. As part of our higher ed principles that we sent up to the Hill for higher education reform, we've been advocating for the expansion of Pell Grants to those citizens who are currently incarcerated but will be returning to their communities so that they can acquire the skills to be able to secure a job once they do return. Obviously, that benefits the individual and their family. It benefits the community. Likelihood of recidivism decreases exponentially if they're able to secure a job. The president just last week had an event at the White House where he focused on the different actions we're taking to our goal of reducing the unemployment rate for the formerly incarcerated, those citizens who have returned home. So right now it is high 20s, and the president has committed to getting it into the single. So I hope that everyone at this table will help us in these efforts because obviously employers about giving people the second chance that they've earned and they deserve. Further to that, and to help catalyze private sector hiring of returning citizens, we have provided the states more than $2 million in fidelity bonds to help returning citizens find that full-time employment. So this is for the private sector. We've also started pilot programs, and I know, Ginny, we've discussed this in the past, but to reform the federal work-study program to expand public-private sector opportunities for low-income students, providing them real occupational training alongside their growing professional networks. Our university ecosystem to the jobs within their communities so they can learn real and applicable skills. We've also launched very excitingly, and Chris Liddell has said, an online job kit that will bring together information and workforce data resources from across the federal government to help software developers and community leaders innovate and better serve the American worker. So this is an important first step as we make the data available for innovation to happen on top of it. And then next month, I'm very excited that we will mark the one-year anniversary of the creation of the Pledge to America's Worker, and we are approaching 10 million commitments from the private sector and trade associations to train, skill, and reskill American workers. So we are incredibly excited about the traction this campaign has gotten. At the end of the meeting, I'll ask a few of you to share some of the stories because we're seeing the impact experienced by Americans who have received the benefit of this training and how it's enhanced their lives and further their lives. And actually, I want to give a special thank you to Bill McDermott for SAP. He's done so well with his initial commitment that he's expanded his commitment because they've already, in under a year, covered almost 60% of their reskilling and enhanced career opportunities. And today is expanding their commitment to 75,000 workers. So we're very, very excited. So thank you, Bill, for your work on that front. But many around this table are in the process of realizing their pledge and creating the impact that we all desire, the private sector and, of course, public sector, as we see. So with that, I'll hand it over to my co-chair. Thank you, Secretary Ross, for everything that you and your team at Commerce are doing each and every day to advance the goals of this council.
Thank you, Ivanka, for that update. And welcome everyone to Charlotte, especially Johnny Taylor, who was on a runway for 8 hours before the flight got canceled last night.
I was on the flight with
him. She was
on
with me. We were together.
And thank you, Mayor Lyles, for hosting us here today, and Barbara Hampton for the tour of Siemens USA this morning. I was even more impressed by that facility than I had anticipated, especially by the high rate of return on investment you achieve in your training and by your extremely high retention rate. Too many people think of training as an expense and not as a profit center, and too many people also fear the loss of their newly trained workers. You have debunked both of those concerns. It's been a busy week for me, having hosted the Select USA Investment Summit last week in Washington, and then traveling this past weekend to the Paris Air Show to open the U.S. Pavilion. The economic dynamism of both events proves that the need for skilled workers will only grow. Ivanka, I thank you for joining us on stage last week to discuss workforce issues in front of more than 3,500 delegates attending the Select USA Summit. During that 3-day summit, we met with executives from 71 countries who are either considering new investments in the U.S. or increasing their existing capacity here. The shortage of workers, however, in a wide range of activities are literally constricting some of their investment plans. We all know the statistics. With the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, there are almost 7.5 million job openings right now, and only 5.9 million Americans officially unemployed. To me, the key target for solving that gap is the 37.2% labor force non-participation rate. Less than a 2% reduction in that non-participation rate would eliminate the gap between available and the people seeking work. So it's not a very heavy lift if we go about it correctly. And many of the millions of Americans who are on the sidelines are able and willing to work, but they lack the right skills. In the 3 months since this advisory board met for the first time at the White House, you and your teams have examined 4 relevant subject areas. First, promoting multiple pathways to careers. Second, increasing data transparency. Third, modernizing candidate recruitment. And fourth, encouraging more employer-led training. Today we will hear from the co-heads of each working group on their priorities and their potential recommendations. Then we will explore the interconnections of your workflows and our next steps. And finally, we'll chart a path to receiving recommendations and, even more importantly, implementing them. If there are actionable items after this meeting, and I hope there will be, let's not wait. Let's just get going. So again, thank you for traveling to be here with the full board. I look forward to today's discussion, and I turn it over to Mayor Lyles.
Welcome to each and every one of you. Having said that, we're really glad that you're here. Charlotte works, and I hope that you, because we believe in collaboration. Now, we understand collaboration is necessary for addressing all of the major issues of an urban city: affordable housing, upward mobility, talent. All of that is around our philosophy that if we work well together, the economic development will come. So recently we had Honeywell relocate here. They're moving their corporate headquarters to Charlotte. I invite each of you to consider doing the same.
That will be hard for the government.
That would be hard for the government. You're in a great place, but we really are trying to do something that's building on the idea that if people have work, then they have value and they contribute and make a difference. And I've talked a good bit about our multiple pathways to upward mobility, and you've seen some examples with our apprenticeship program at Siemens. We hope to also continue with the Prison Reform Act in probably coming right out of the White House and being adopted. We're expecting 20,000 people to do reentry. This is something urban areas have to be prepared to do. They're not going back home. They're coming to places that they can find a place to train and a place to work. And that's why this program is so important. It's not just for the Honeywells of the world. It's for every citizen. So I'm really glad to hear you, Mr. Secretary, talk about the participation rate changing, because we believe if we all work together, we can make that difference. In our programs, whatever we're trying to do, I believe if we work with a focus and an energy around those that are currently not in the workplace, if we can bring them forward with whatever skill set that they need to have for the future, then this country continues on a pathway of success and great economic development and opportunity. So again, thank you for being here and choosing us, Mr. Secretary, giving us a go.
An absolutely incredible host. And I think the statistics that have been cited by both yourself and the Secretary should really energize each of us, because when you look at what is happening and when you look at the opportunity in a tight labor market, it's exactly that. It's increased workforce participation, it's higher wages. All of these things are great for American workers. Actually, in April alone, 70% of all the people who came into the workforce and secured a job were from the sidelines, not from unemployment. So there are people, many, many people who are coming off the sidelines who have been marginalized, who are now entering the economy and getting to work. This is true in the fourth quarter of 2018 as well. 73% of all people who secured a new job were from the sidelines, not unemployment. So it's a great opportunity for us all. And with that, I would love to turn it over to Tim Cook and Ginny Rometty. You are both spearheading the first pillar, which is our campaign to promote and celebrate the multiple pathways to career success and how we approach this. So, Tim, if I could hand it over to you, that'd be great.
Yeah. So thanks, Ivanka, and it's great to be back in North Carolina. Ginny and I are pleased to present this report. Our group, as you know, is called Developing a Campaign to Promote Multiple Pathways to Career Success. Before I begin, I want to express my gratitude to Ivanka and Secretary Ross, who brought us all together today, and also to their White House and Commerce teams for the support and partnership. It takes real foresight to see clearly both the opportunities and the challenges on this topic, and it takes determination to square up to them. Every American should have access to a well-paying job and career. This group's mission is to ensure the best and most innovative education and training programs are available to everyone, including but not limited to a traditional four-year college degree. I believe that at its core that education is the great equalizer. By giving every person an equal chance to learn and to access opportunity, you can unleash really incredible human potential. Today, education is taking new and exciting forms. In technology, we see clearly how a four-year degree isn't necessary to be an exceptional software engineer, app developer, or entrepreneur, and we see that very clearly at Apple. And by expanding access to coding and associated skills, we can enlarge the circle of opportunity to include many, many more people. To that end, Apple's Everyone Can Code curriculum is now in use in thousands of U.S. schools and training facilities, teaching students and adults how to build careers in the $120 billion app economy. This effort is spreading across the country. In Texas, Houston Community College was among the first post-secondary institutions in the nation to offer app development coding courses. And Alabama, which is my home state, has the first statewide community college system to embrace app development with Swift. One of our newest examples is in Idaho, where Boise State University has created a new gaming, interactive media, and mobile initiative where students create apps to solve community challenges, learning highly marketable skills in the process. As I look around this room this morning, it's refreshing to see how Apple is just one of the many examples that are around the table that we've been hearing about as a part of the work group. Ginny and I are both thrilled to have the partnership of our 17 board members in this critical effort, most of which are here this morning. We're grateful for everyone's participation and input. This is very much a collaborative effort, and we're looking forward to the many great conversations. So let me get right to the meat of our report. The working groups met 3 times since our March board meeting, and we've got strong consensus around our goals and our work plan. We anticipate that there will be at least another 2 or 3, maybe more, meetings prior to our September board meeting where we plan to provide preliminary recommendations. We have focused on 2 priorities as our goals. The first is a national campaign to promote the growing number of pathways to well-paying employment in the United States, including high-quality education training programs, from apprenticeships, tech certification programs, and others that leave employees with valuable and marketable skills. The second is to advance local, state, and federal policies, as well as employer and educational practices to sustain and expand these pathways. So on goal 1, when it comes to the national awareness campaign, we work collaboratively to think through the focus, target audience, and message delivery and the resourcing of the program. We plan to extend that input over the next few months to include outside experts, such as the Ad Council, as well as our own in-house marketing teams to be sure that we have absolutely the best advice possible guiding us. The consensus of the working group is to approach the campaign in 2 ways. 1, The first is to launch a media and marketing campaign focused on informing students, parents, high school counselors, employers, and workers about the multiple pathways leading to empowering employment. It would feature the compelling stories of real-life people from all walks of life who are excelling in their careers as a result of one of these alternate pathways. We think this is the best possible way to inspire people, is showing what success other people have. Two, the second is a targeted advocacy campaign aimed at building widespread and sustained support among national business, labor, and education leaders and organizations. Those on this board who represent all of these constituencies know better than anyone how important their support is. Long after the board completes its work, it's this buy-in that will perpetuate and grow these opportunities moving forward. Over the next few months, we're going to develop core messages and determine delivery platforms and funding options with the goal of presenting recommendations in September. The marketing and advocacy campaigns have a target launch date of early 2020. Very aggressive. Our second goal recognizes that career education and training are changing in the U.S. The traditional four-year degree, which was once the primary driver of opportunity, is now one among many. Our job is to identify the most promising and inspiring pathways to success that America has to offer and to think through the policies at all levels that can help them flourish. Among the ideas that we're talking about are, one, incentive funding for community and two-year technical trade schools that prioritize high-demand fields such as advanced manufacturing, which I think a lot of folks got to see some in practice this morning, computer programming, cybersecurity, health and wellness, and other fields where the U.S. is a strong global leader. Two, we're going to provide additional support and funding for high school dual enrollment programs focused on high-demand fields that lead to industry-recognized certifications. Saw this in practice in Iowa and was very impressed with it. Three, we're looking at expanding the federal Pell Grant program to support high-quality, short-duration training to give high school graduates as well as low-skilled, dislocated, or mid-career workers a chance to develop their long-term employment potential. Thankfully, a model for this already exists. The Second Chance Pell Pilot program, which Ivanka mentioned earlier, for incarcerated or recently incarcerated individuals, which the administration is extending to dozens more post-secondary institutions. Last but not least, we're going to look to the states to lead the way. We recognize the leadership of Governor Reynolds in Iowa and Governor Holcomb in Indiana, both which have been champions in their states and beyond, and embrace the policies in places like Arizona, where Governor Ducey done something very interesting lately by leading the charge to do away with burdensome relicensing barriers for out-of-state teachers, nurses, hygienists, social workers, and other professionals. These barriers are costly and disproportionately affect lower-income individuals. The states can and should act today to attract top talent by eliminating these lengthy and expensive license renewal processes where they are unnecessary. This is a huge issue and affects more than a third of all jobs in the United States. We believe ideas such as these and others hold tremendous promise. We look forward to developing them further and to providing a set of recommendations for consideration later this year. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my partner, Jenny.
Thanks, Tim.
Please, yeah.
Because I think Tim covered pretty much everything, so I'm just going to add a few points of accentuation and a little bit of detail. So first, as the mayor said, this point about having multiple pathways and what we're doing, I just wanted to remind you that when we all said that you don't have to have a college degree as the only path, only a third of Americans have a college degree today, and 44 million have started a degree but not finished either. So if you look at that and the fact that the Department of Labor did a study that said almost 130 million people will need real retraining. We're almost targeting everyone in what we're talking about. And so just a little bit of hope here. I mean, we've been focused on this, as Tim mentioned, some of Apple's projects on hiring non-four-year degree for certain jobs. And we're one of the largest hirers in this country, and last year 15% of the hires were the non-4-year degree jobs. So 15% is a pretty large number already, and they're outstanding. So just an encouragement for us all. But if I could add on then just a couple comments on the media campaign, because we're going to ask everyone around the table for some success stories, and you have them. And I wanted to just add a little bit of meat to this idea of using the Ad Council as a potential opportunity here, because it would be a campaign that's appealing to everyone about that there's these multiple pathways there. And I don't know how many of you have worked with Ad Council before. They pick an issue, and then they work with agencies sort of pro bono to develop the content, and then they'll work with others to pro bono place the media, if you've known. We just, in the last 6 months, worked with them on something called She Can STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. And the results are pretty phenomenal, and it was targeted at, so very much, at least one of the consumer groups Tim talked about, 11 to 15-year-old girls, and after 6 months, 50% recall of what STEM now means, almost 70% recall of that there's a role model, like another woman out there that's doing a technology-oriented job that they could aspire to. Those are really high numbers after a short period of time. So I'm encouraged, and as Tim said, we'll focus on not only students but parents, some development groups, and then as well mid-career professionals, because mid-career is going to be the hardest thing for us to work on, I think. So that is one of the initiatives that Tim had cited under the media in the campaign. But I think this is one we could make some pretty quick headway and quickly get out there. I know you all have stories already of success, and with our own people telling them. And so that's one I would strongly, that's an ask of the group here, even if you're not on our committee. The second one I wanted just to add a little bit of meat on the bones, and we are going to probably ask for some help from both Ivanka and the secretary here, but the idea of the policy points that Tim made, we do have a window, because a campaign's one thing, but to make it sustainable, we're going to want policy change underneath this. And this summer, fall, there is an opportunity to finalize the higher education authorization package. It just happens to be in this timing. And so 3 ideas that we're putting up here. One, Ivanka already mentioned, because in that higher education authorization, I know others know this well, it's about $130 billion of federal funding, and one is for it's a small number that goes, but there's a couple billion that goes to work-study programs. And what Ivanka mentioned, the pilot that they've secured by an excellent job on an experimental, what's his official name? An experimental pilot or something to that effect. And it's to allow, if you're in college, work-study, that you can go work in private industry. You will be shocked to know that today only 1% of the students go work in private industry. 99 are doing jobs within the university. It could be being a librarian. It could be sweeping the floors. And we all know if they do a job in industry, they're going to more likely be prepared for a real role when they come out. So this current pilot lifts that limit, but we would want to enshrine that permanently and get employers to take these kids and pull them, right? So that's number one. The second thing for HEA would be to expand the eligibility. There was a comment here made about Pell Grants. Today, I'll shorten it. You have to be a full-time student. There's more caveats, but I'm just shortening it. You have to be a full-time student. Well, that doesn't do much if you're mid-career and you have to keep working and go back for school. You also have to take 600 hours of class. Well, if you're working, or let's say you want to be an EMT in California, where Tim's from, that's only 170 hours. So you wouldn't qualify, that you could have went back part-time to shift over. So an idea, open it so that you don't have to be full-time and also less than 600 hours. So to us, it's straightforward. I do know the issues out there already that we have to address, and that would be about quality of programs and about being sure that we don't dilute serving the underprivileged as part of this. And then the third idea of a policy is to expand the usage of loans for apprenticeships, as an example. So I think they're pretty straightforward, but they really give a signal. Bachelor degree is not the only way. Full-time student is not the only way. So we've got some work to do. We'll have to work with Senators Murray and Alexander, which we are quite accustomed to from our work together in the White House was so helpful on the Perkins Grant. So we are experienced in this, and as well as doing some good work together with Bobby Scott, who's the chairman in the House on this committee. I would only add one other to what Tim had on our list together, which was we do welcome some other ideas at our work sessions coming up. And I have heard one idea, which we'd have to flesh out, a tax-advantaged education fund that follows you through your lifetime. There has been chatter about this topic, and so that's probably one of the ones I've heard from both our group and more broadly that we would want to see if there's anything there. So I'll just wrap at that then. So I think we've got a good fall. Really, I would hope that by, this fall we're finalizing and we could get the campaign going and then get these policy recommendations. And some are near in term, right, that we can hopefully impact. And I think if we do that, that's a great job for this committee.
And we're working hard to show proof of concept through the pilot.
The pilot is outstanding that you got achieved and got that done, I think, because really that pilot for work study, it opens up the gates for any private company to pull these kids in and use that funding for that.
Well, thank you, Tim and Ginny. You have been absolutely amazing, and the whole working group in terms of driving it forward in a substantive and also fast fashion. So we appreciate that. And to everyone around the table, please share your stories. That enables people to believe that it could be their story, or they could emulate that success. And also share your chief marketing officers' ideas on how to do this, because there's not one right way, and there are multiple demographics that we're trying to reach. There are multiple industries where we need to fill a void. So what's the most compelling message to resonate as we talk about these multiple pathways? So we appreciate the feedback from everyone even outside of the working group. With that, I will turn it over to Governor Holcomb and Bill McDermott to discuss their work on increasing data transparency to better match American workers with American jobs. So thank you, Governor. Maybe you'll kick us off.
Good afternoon. That has led our team to focus our efforts in this session on three main topics. One, breaking down the building an individual's record that can follow that person around, that outlines their learning history, their experience, their skill set. And three, building an improved skill-based occupational ontology. And currently, there are many efforts around the table. So you're intimately aware and have created this. Lots of different examples around the country to find solutions for an improved skill-based ontology, but until and unless we come together again collectively to develop a common language, one of which we all speak and share those skills that are necessary for the jobs of today and tomorrow, we'll continue to be, as we find ourselves often at the state and federal level, disjointed, maybe out of date, using stale data that offers no true way for us or for that individual to find those training programs and to build current curriculum. And so we're very excited about advancements that have been made in our states and companies that are no longer just using a degree as a filter and the only filter, maybe, but to focus on, again, those specific job skill sets that are required for those competencies that are truly necessary for those specific occupations. I know it's easier said than done, but it has to be done, and we have to make progress on this front without this collective effort from states, from the federal government, from individual employers, and at least some common identification of those skills and training providers. Then we're going to continue to not offer the solutions that really hit the mark, because too often folks are programmed to miss the mark. So, again, very encouraged about the work that's being done. It's just imperative. In Indiana, we created a performance management hub. We call it NPH. Happy to share that with our colleagues around the country, where we're able to share data from agency to agency. It required specific legislation to allow us to share taking in consideration privacy issues, turf issues, but we simply have to be able to communicate amongst ourselves if we're going to connect people to the opportunities that are out there waiting on them. And then lastly, and I'll just state the obvious before I kick it over to Bill, sharing this data across federal programs at the state level obviously has never been easy, but we are encouraged by the Foundation for Evidence-Based Policy-Making Act, enacted by the President earlier in January, as a step in the right direction, finding this better way to understand those specific services being provided to individuals, removing those barriers that currently exist for those individuals, and finding ways to literally braid together these funding streams so they're getting to the exact person and company that need them to grow. And so, in partnership with SAP, Bill and I sent out a survey to better understand these issues that I've just kind of given you a thumbnail sketch of, the issues state agencies deal with each and every day, and creating these data sharing efforts. And I'm excited to, Bill, hear from you.
Thank you.
And about all we've learned.
Well, thank you very much, Governor. I really appreciate it. And I'd like to, in particular, thank you, Governor, for the friendship and the partnership. It's really a pleasure working with you. I also like to extend to Ivanka, Secretary Ross, Deputy Secretary Kelly, and Chris Liddell. Thank you for your leadership in implementing this vision of a workforce that's innovative, and we're doing it at a really critical moment in the history of the world. So thank you very much for your leadership. It's an honor to participate in this. The math is pretty simple. I'll just pick up where the Governor left off. Here's the basics of it all. If you don't get the basics right, there's really no hope. So in getting the basics right, as the Governor said, we focused on a simple but a robust system for sharing workforce data so we can break down the barriers and provide real solutions to the American worker. We'll discuss that today. Secondly, this idea of a flexible, skill-based ecosystem so that those who need the skills can get them, and those who have the skills know where the jobs are. And, of course, ultimately, those who want those skilled workers can easily access them. Third and finally, we have to establish a portable, interoperable record of an individual's learning history. This indicates their experience and their skills, and this takes the unnecessary friction out of the system so you can have that clear visibility. Candidates and job holders alike have to be seen clearly because they want us to acknowledge them. This is who I am. This is what I know. Put me in the game. Ultimately, we're dealing with a fairly simple equation here. We have willing job seekers, millions of unfilled jobs, and frankly, too many obstacles that are preventing real progress. So the good news is, and you'll see this in a minute, there is a viable solution, and we can fundamentally solve this problem together. But first, we have to ask the right questions. We kind of know what's going on, but it's also important to know why it's going on. And therefore, one of the things that we did as a company is we decided to take on the experience economy and solve the experience gap. And I think this idea of growth is all about solving that gap. There's a $1.6 trillion gap between what people say they're giving you and ultimately the way you actually receive what they gave you. 80% of the CEOs feel like they're giving you exactly what you paid for, and actually only 10% of the people on the receiving end agree with them. So this gap has to be solved. We at SAP believe strongly in a platform called Qualtrics, and that's why we acquired them. And this is why we're measuring experiences and validating approaches and turning results into real action. So today, I want you to know that we reached out to experts in government, CIOs, CTOs, and Chief Information Security Officers, and we basically asked them, what are the problems that you are facing, and how can we help? Simply put, we wanted to understand the workforce data sharing problem, and we wanted to understand not just what was happening, but why it was happening in the voice of the customer. Changed everything. So today we have with us SAP's Chief Innovation Officer himself, the one and only Max Wessel, who's going to take you through that survey. Max?
Feedback from the more than 1,300 executives across state and local government that we reached out to. It's continuing to come in, but informing us on specifically data sharing. And I say we concentrate on data sharing because the variety of data is quite vast when it comes to solving this skill gap issue. Hiring data is important because it tells us about demand. Educational data is important because it tells us about the skills that we are preparing our workforce for. Demographic data and information is critical because we have to understand the individual unit. And it would not surprise everybody in this room to understand that all of that data sits in different places. And you need to bring it together to make valuable decisions. We reached out, and it is unsurprising, as you'll see from this chart, 84% of our respondents said that it is absolutely critical to have data in the creation of policy or executing against strategic goals. So this is not specific to the relevance of data, but data outside of their organization. 61%, unfortunately, came back to us and said that it was extremely difficult to obtain data from agencies where they knew this data might reside. And a full 40%, this is the real problem, could point to a specific data asset. So this, in this process, we actually asked, what's the data that you would require? How would it be relevant? And how would you obtain it? And they said, here's where it is, here's why it's relevant, and I have tried and cannot get access to it. So that problem is what we wanted to dive into, because if we can solve that problem, we can bring information together for better decision making. And if you jump to the next slide, I think this is the key. 52% of respondents, when we dug deeper, said that federal laws and regulations were the single biggest barrier to data sharing. And that is a very easy answer to give. Everybody can point fingers at federal regulation and say this is the problem. Luckily, we were able to collect a whole lot of context around that answer. And what we found was that it wasn't regulation per se. It wasn't explicit barriers, but it was the shadow that regulation cast on the decision to open up data from one organization to another that kept people from sharing. Even if an agency leader believed that it was legal to provide data to a sister organization, the potential recourse and fear from getting that decision wrong kept them taking a posture of no. They would be happy to have more clarity on how data could be shared and how. And what we found was when data was shared, the folks who referenced it in our feedback talked about ad hoc solutions that were created in a one-off manner. You can solve a problem when a law or a grant is provided, but if it's solved once, then you generate a static report. You can't use that information to make ongoing decisions. And here, we believe that there is a great progress in the work, or there's great progress to be made with the work that Governor Holcomb cited. At the federal level, the U.S. Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking has made it clearer to folks how they can share data between organizations. That same guidance at the state and local level seems like it can add value in opening up this work. I believe we've also used this survey to hone the work that our working group is pursuing over the next few months. It's important to know the why. We also recognize that there is a great challenge in interpreting data once you bring it together, and here's the focus for our skills-based ontology. We have lots of job titles, we have lots of skills in the country, And for each of our organizations in the private sector, we happen to know what those skills are, how they map to new jobs emerging. But there's a long feedback loop in getting that information into our government's hands and helping make informed decision from a policy-making perspective. So we will be focusing in the next few months on figuring out how we can close that gap. And finally, Bill mentioned the interoperable learning record. One of the issues that will always exist is data sharing across organizations. Even if we streamline it and make it easier, is going to be a process because we want our institutions to steward personal data in an important way, which means we can empower individuals if they would like to expedite this process if we give them secure means to control and move their records around to make meaningful progress. And so there we will be focusing in the next few months on how such a standard or such a record could emerge. But again, I am very happy for the progress and thankful to have the opportunity to share it with you.
I have two suggestions to answer some of those problems. We ran into the same thing getting organized with the census, trying to get records from other federal agencies, trying to get them from states. We found that the way you do it, come with your draft of an agreement that limits the use of it and ask them, if you want this modified, modify it the way you want and we'll sign it. That way they can't hide behind the rules thing because we've given them a path and their own choice. Then on the access, we agreed to encrypt data from the time it was in transit, any time that it was at rest, and to have a lifetime oath by the people who have access to it not to use it for any other purpose. And finally, to agree to put noise into the published aggregate report so that people couldn't reverse engineer and get back to the underlying data. So it was a massive effort, but we would be glad to share the kind of documentation that we used because it was a big problem, but we're trying to rely a lot more on administrative records, and we got 48 states so far signed up, even with sensitive things like WIC, SNAP, resident, things of that sort. So I think I wouldn't be too disheartened by the existing thing. I think nobody went the extra step of pushing.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We know that with your input and the force of will that this group has, these are absolutely solvable problems. The data is there. It's how we manage it. And on behalf of Governor Holcomb and myself, it's an honor to make a contribution in service to every American dream out there with every American worker, because we know that's what's going to keep this country on top. So, Ivanka, again, heartfelt thank you for everything.
Secretary, I noticed the reaction of a lot of people getting quite excited about what you're talking about, the opportunity, information and opportunity. So I have a feeling you'll be getting a lot more incoming on this. I also think that what we've seen and what we've been able to do as a federal government in terms of enabling interoperability in the health industry through programs rolled out by SEMA last year, it's a blueprint for what we're talking about here. And I think this idea of an individualized learning record is quite exciting and really empowers the student and worker in a very real way. So thank you for the great recommendations, super thoughtful, and we look forward to next steps. With that, I'd love to turn it over to Johnny Taylor from SHRM and Al Kelly with Visa to discuss their work in modernizing candidate recruitment and training practices. So, Johnny, do you want to kick us off?
Gladly. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity. Ross, Secretary Ross, thank you. Ivanka, Mayor Lyles, we've been at this for 25 years. I actually lived here in Charlotte. We were both on the Chamber of Commerce board here years ago, right? So thank you. And, of course, Barbara for hosting us. Thank you. We're going to tag team this, right? And I'll take a lead on just quickly reviewing the work that we've been doing. first, we've met 3 times as well as a group since our board meeting, and we're working on specifically 2 goals. First is to improve the labor force participation rate, and I'll start with explaining what it is, because that's the thing that we found amazing. And talking about, not understanding common language, we learned that a lot of people didn't really understand it. We talk about the unemployment rate, et cetera, and it's just people are lost. There's 6 different federal categories of that, for example. So we'll talk about that. And we realized the aha moment for us was what oftentimes happens, especially around this table. You have the Apples and IBMs and SAPs and the like. We're all going after the same people. So what happens is if we hire 100 people, all you've done is taken them from another company. We've not focused on the underutilized talent. Increasing our labor participation rate is the way that we really lift this country for all people. So we said we need to first better identify the untapped pools and locations, by the way, geographically, because there are places where there's significant unemployment and underemployment, and we've got to find those people. And too often what we've done is we've taken census data information and we'll say Washington, D.C., for example, has 3% unemployment. It depends upon which zip code in Washington, D.C. you live in, because you can be right across the pond in Anacostia where there's 20% unemployment. So we've really said we've got to really dig into this so that we don't speak in these broad generalizations and we can really geolocate and get to untapped pools. And the other thing is we want to optimize the employment opportunities for those people. The second thing that we said, and Al will really take this up, is our goal is to modernize recruitment, hiring, and training practices. No surprise. I'm amazed when we walk into meetings sometimes and people are still saying, do you have a resume? Like, we don't do that anymore. And you'd be surprised. Our profession, the human resources profession, has been charged with bringing us into, I jokingly say, the 20th century, because people are still, there's a lag. And we'll spend some time, and Al will talk about that in more detail. As to the first topic, during our first meeting, we discussed, again, the need to focus more on underutilized talent pools, a key part of our work. Given the fact that, as Ivanka said, 73% of the people who started work in the last quarter of 2018 were actually outside of the workforce. They were not who we'd consider unemployed, and we were literally bringing them back into the workplace. So we need to know more about those people. Where did they come from? What were the barriers? What can we do to find the rest of them to solve for these problems so that we can get the workforce get everyone participating in the workforce. We need also as employers to understand who these people are and what we need to do to remove the barriers. There are some real barriers. Some of them are as simple as transportation. Some of them are policy sort of barriers. They want to go back to school to get the skills that they need, but we don't offer Pell if you don't work this many hours, take this many classes, or you're not full-time versus part-time, et cetera. So we said let's really discuss and understand that. The second, though, thing that we decided to do in our second meeting was to better understand. So we invited a couple of really smart people in from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, and they were really smart. I mean, everything they said, and I'll repeat that once again, because just understanding labor force participation rate, I learned, for example, that we have 165 million people in the workforce. That's what they consider the American available workforce, although we have 327 million people, Americans. So about 50% of them, and they went through and defined it, and just common misperceptions. If you, for example, are asked or considered to be unemployed, it's because you have to have been looking for a job within the prior 4 weeks. So if someone, believe it or not, receives a call from BLS, the survey takers, and they've been on vacation for 6 weeks, they're not actively looking for employment. They're not counted in the unemployment numbers. A lot of that is what we've got to think through and better understand when the headlines are X, Y, and Z, is to really dig through and understand this. So BLS was wonderful. We learned things like how they define people who are attached. I thought that means a relationship of some sort, and it means there are people who are looking for jobs who have jobs already. They're considered attached. Those who have limited attachment are people who have part-time jobs. I mean, there's really an interesting talking about, choosing common language. We're sorting through all of that so that we can get a common person's sort of perspective and then explain this to business, explain it to hiring managers so that we're all singing from the same sheet. Finally, on our third meeting, we discussed getting more and additional information from BLS. Again, dissecting what is meant by unemployment. There's nothing more frustrating to go into communities and say, we're at record low unemployment, and they say, but I know a ton of people who don't have jobs. And so there's this major disconnect, and thus the feedback is those of us in Washington, D.C. have no clue. We have to figure that out as employers as a part of this work. We're going to modernize our recruitment processes because we may have convinced ourselves that we have some talent deficits where we may not really have the talent deficits. We just have to find them. So spent a lot of time working on that, and I'll spend more time after my colleague Al Kelly describes the work that they're doing on the second part.
A size of a pool that's available to work. You guys, after all that, come up to what is the size roundabout?
So the BLS is helping us get to that point. Because it's complicated by who's available to work, under what circumstances. So if you look at the formerly incarcerated, for example, technically available to work, but if they have limitations pursuant to their release on the hours that they can leave home, there's so many variables here that, frankly, I didn't even think about. Like, can this person get there? What are the transportation barriers? What are the housing barriers? Can they get a driver's license in some states? So we're trying to identify, and at our next meeting, as one of our sort of deliverables, we're going to be able to tell you exactly how many people are available, where they are by zip code, where the talent. I know that a wonderful governor over here bragged the last time, Iowa has the lowest unemployment in the country, right? And so you have people in markets. We have to deal with issues of mobility. Maybe from a policy perspective, we actually move people to other parts of the country where so those are the sorts of issues that we're going to
start with all adults and then you move it.
And then how do you define an adult if the person is 16 or older, right? So yes, and we're working through all of that.
And I think what will be helpful for us as well is, as you're going through this process, also thinking about the feedback for how we can improve and modernize our collection of data and the process in which we collect data. So I'm sure BLS would love that information, and we would certainly love that information, how we can make sure that we're collecting the most relevant data for the needs that you're targeting.
And the final takeaway for us before I turn it over is that there are some well-intended policies that aren't exactly working the way they're supposed to work. So, for example, there's the Workforce Opportunity Tax Credit. That is, if you don't know anything about it, WOTC, I guess, is the way they refer to it, but it gives tax credits for hiring certain people who are from underutilized communities. And one of the observations, for example, is that you have to self-identify. If you qualify for the credit, then the person has to identify who they are. So think about this. If you ban the box, then hiring a formerly incarcerated person, you don't know that they're formerly incarcerated, so therefore you can't get WOTC credit. You get it? Right. I know you're like, yeah, I know. We're realizing that there are billions of dollars sitting out there for employers to take advantage of to hire these people, but the unintended consequence of the policy is it would require that the person self-identify. So those are the sorts of things we're going to sort through and come up with some solutions.
Johnny, thank you. Not bad for a guy who spent a third of a day on the tarmac just killing time. I'm happy to report out on the second focus area on behalf of my 8 fellow member colleagues and their teams behind the scene who are involved in this as well. And this focus area of modernizing recruitment and training really goes hand in hand with the first focus area, and in fact is an extension of it. If we're going to identify and take the time to identify, very importantly, underutilized talent pools, we clearly have to figure out how we match them to potential employers. And so modernizing recruitment and training practices has to encompass a number of things. It has to encompass new approaches to outreach. It has to encompass revamping job descriptions and postings that emphasize the skills required versus the educational credentials earned. It's got to encompass more flexibility in how and when we interview. We have to clearly articulate the skills that are needed for jobs that will be developing in the near term and in the medium term. And we have to have an accelerated and continual feedback loop between hiring managers and people providing skilling so that there's a good alignment between the jobs of the future and the skills that people are going to need to be able to qualify for those jobs. as Johnny mentioned, we had a few meetings. I thought I'd highlight a few specifics that came out of these meetings. First, at IBM under Ginny's leadership and at Home Depot under Greg's leadership, they've started to get in a process of allowing people to interview at times that work for them. And I really want to emphasize this because it is so simple. It's so smart. It's really low tech. This isn't like genius kind of stuff. All due respect to my colleagues. But in some ways, the simplest things, the ways we've done things traditionally, like we interview between 9 and 5, get in the way of progress. And so, I have to admit, I've been asking questions myself at Visa about when we interview after having heard about what you guys are doing at IBM and Home Depot. So, and I say this all the time internally within my company, that we don't always, the best ideas aren't always like these really sexy, very tech-driven ideas. Many of the best ideas for making progress are actually low-tech and just smart. It's actually being willing to break the traditional ways in which we have done things. At Visa, I've asked our university training program, Visa University, and our diversity recruiting teams to collaborate on identifying alternative talent pools. So we are working with high school and community college students from underserved communities. We're doing coding boot camps for San Francisco Bay Area high school students. We're working with the National Academy Foundation to help high-risk high school students pursue careers in STEM. And there's more to be done, but we have to try to turn these rocks over in order to make progress. The U.S. Chamber was invited to our second meeting, and Tom, we appreciate your leadership. 5 years ago, the Chamber started looking at this talent gap, and they started something called the Talent Management Pipeline. And it's a concept to bring various industry sectors together to help identify pain points and skill gaps, and then go build alignment with educational institutions to develop customizable curriculum. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to do more of. It's a great example of the partnerships that I think have to exist in order to actually make progress on building the skills and matching them to the jobs of the future. We're going to continue to work over the coming months to unearth other best practices and best ideas. But to date, there's a few things we know. We need a more common language among employers to better connect candidates to jobs that match their skill set. We need to help match employers to underutilized talent pools. These two things have to come together, and that's going to be very important. We're also looking at evaluating how AI could possibly help in this process of matching employers and the skills of candidates to try to streamline the process. But more work to be done, and we expect to have, be on track, Ivanka and Mr. Secretary, on track to have final recommendations for both of these focus areas by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you so much, Al. And finally, I'm going to turn it back to Barbara Humpton to share with us some of the work that you are doing on the fourth pillar, which is measuring and encouraging employer-led training investments, like the excellent one many of us in this room witnessed this morning. And then Johnny is prepared to share the results of a SHRM survey conducted as part of this working group. So maybe, Barbara,
I'll kick things off. And we all know what gets measured gets done, right?
Yeah.
So here's our theme. But first, thank you, Secretary Ross, and thank you, Ivanka. This has been such a privilege, and I get so inspired listening to the kind of no-nonsense recommendations people are working on right now. This has been a fantastic working group. We've had 3 sessions meeting together. And the idea that we could get together on a teleconference, unable to see each other, and yet really build on each other's ideas and generate good forward progress has really been fun and I think something that can be a good model for some problem solving in a lot of different areas. I'm really also pleased. Mike Pivovar couldn't be with us today. He is the co-chair of this group, and He's at the Milken Institute Global Forum graciously hosted our subcommittee in that first week of May when they were meeting. It was a great opportunity for us to be together in person. And also, Mike wanted to pass along thanks to Ivanka and Secretary Ross for having featured these topics as part of your remarks in the Global Forum as well. So clearly, right, making this a topic of discussion in the work that we do generally. What I'd like to do is take a couple of moments and update everyone on the work that we're doing, and really you're going to hear from Johnny because so much of what we need here, just as I've heard from the other teams, there's been an element of we need to collect data. So let's talk about our goals first. We're seeking to develop recommendation on national measures of employer-led workforce training, and as part of that, we're focusing on two areas. One, creating a common framework for classifying training investments. And boy, doesn't this sound like a common theme, right? We need a common vernacular for talking about what are the jobs, what are these skills that people have. And here what we're saying also is let's think about the investments folks are making and creating that common framework. That's based on research into how companies are currently tracking. I'll add that I think one of the difficult things we need to be aware of is we do have a lot of large companies at the table here, but small and medium business enterprises are driving half of the workforce and half of that growth opportunity. So coming up with recommendations here that are practical for smaller enterprises across the nation is key for us. And we want to recommend ways to collect national data, whether that's from a federal government or trade association surveys, corporate reporting, or even financial statements that help us get to what is that return on investment of employer-led training. Now, what we've done first is to gather input from the working group to learn how each of us is today classifying and measuring our training. And it's made that pretty clear that there is a lot of variation going on. But we have some big buckets, and Johnny will share with you the big buckets that we're looking at. So then what are we going to do to establish a foundation to measure that learning investment? Well, that's what we're working on, but we are well along the way here in terms of gathering that data. We can also begin to encourage employees to embrace lifelong learning and to be part of the recruiting process for bringing talent that we need into the workplace. And I really do want to emphasize lifelong learning. Ginny, I think your point about this needs to be every bit as much about those of us who thought we were at the end of our career and discovered, no, this is the new middle, right? We're going to be working longer. and all of us, and many in our workforces, today we were proud to introduce some folks who've been part of the Siemens workforce here in Charlotte for 4 decades. And so key questions about how we'll be encouraging that kind of lifelong learning. There's going to be a return on investment both to the company in terms of retaining workforce and being productive, but also to individuals. The return on investment, as I've heard you all talk about, maybe portable learning records and credentials, that if we can look at this return on investment from multiple different perspectives. So really we're thrilled that SHRM volunteered to use their capabilities and their resources in order to conduct a study to help us get a broader understanding of how learning is measured and classified. And given that you've already actioned and completed that survey in these early days, we wanted to get out of the study it phase as quickly as possible. And then we'll hear from Johnny about that, but I want to take a moment and just share with you, we've had a tremendous amount of dialogue about the potential of using the Pledge to America's Workers as a foundation and an ongoing platform for helping to encourage employer-led investments in training. Really the key things we've heard expressed are we've obviously had this tremendous wave of getting companies signing up. And to see the pledge from international companies last week at Select USA was actually overwhelming. The numbers have been rising, 7 million the last time we met, 10 million now. And a key question we're getting is, how will we follow through on that? How will we know about the success stories? And I would say the consensus of our subcommittee is that while tracking and reporting is a tempting thing, none of us want to really add, new sort of burdensome requirements, but what we do want to do is create a platform for telling the stories. And telling those stories will reflect both the individual return on investment as well as the business return on investment. And then one other thought we're having in these early days is, what about having the pledge sustain itself, after any, specific administrative action? So, what is the best future step? Should this actually have a home in the administration, in government? Should it be supported by external, say, industry associations? Could it actually be led by a private foundation? Those are things that we would consider and want to bring back to the board as a whole. So clearly what we're focused on here is enhancing visibility, telling the story, making sure employers know about the power of the investments they're making in training. Let me do this then. Let me pause here and see if you'd like to have any comment or discussion on these. Given we do have, several comments here that are common in terms of the need to create common vernacular, vocabularies, and then, of course, the need to get from our survey step into our action step. Any comments before I turn things over to Johnny?
Well, one note I'd like to make, sorry, Jenny. In July, we're coming up on the one-year anniversary of the pledge and celebrating the success of all of those around the table who have signed it, and the over 250 companies around the country and increasingly around the world who are now signing and committing to reskilling American workers and students and offering them enhanced career opportunities. We're going to take the month of July and really focus on getting outside of D.C. and into communities. Cabinet secretaries, the president is going to do an event highlighting the work that we've been doing. So we'd ask all of you to, again, share stories with us, but think about how you can galvanize people within your own communities to sign up. If you want to host an event for a member of the administration, top White House official or cabinet secretary, but really just to elevate awareness that this is something that is being done by the private sector and is a smart investment. And I think going back to the foundation of what we're trying to accomplish by measuring is we've all seen how this is an investment that's cut when the economy isn't as strong and robust. And we think we can prove, we know we can anecdotally, but we haven't quantitatively proven that this is a really smart investment with a positive ROI and should not be the first thing that's cut. It should be the last. So that's what we're attempting to accomplish. And Ginny, you were starting to say something.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you there. I just had two. I'm not sure they're good ideas, but let me just throw them out because something Barbara said, Al said, Ivanka, and how successful the pledge has been. I don't know if we want to do this. I mean, one idea could be to extend that pledge. As I was thinking about, every employer needs to redo their HR teams need to redo their job requisitions, top to bottom, to take in a different group of people. And so you really have to redo all your requisitions and how you do. And I wonder if we could have every HR leader make a pledge to America to redo top to bottom their recruiting, requirements that they put out there. And just an idea. So maybe
sure, I don't have anything to do, Jenny, but
yeah, but because that if you don't enable that, the demand side will not pull in the people we're all talking about creating. So just something. I don't know if you want to extend your pledge idea to another. If every HR leader, it could be the CEOs, or it could be every HR leader signs up and says, no, I commit that I'm going to redo our recruiting requirements to bring in 120 other million. Look at the pool of whatever you guys determine. It's 100 million that are available to work, right? So one thought.
And that's something that as we're signing up the pledge, we can be informing people about as
It's been so successful, you might want to put a 1B, 1C, I don't know, as an idea.
That's a great idea.
The other, just real quick, the other thought I had on this one was, as you were talking about training, it's really not like offering classes. Back to this point about skills matter, I wonder if we should frame most of everything we're doing around how to get the right skills, like employers investing in your skill, which it may be through training, but it may be through your job experiences, all other kinds of things. So I don't know if we're...
That's a great point, that training comes in many forms.
It does.
We've used that word training broadly.
I mean it broadly,
but back to the whole vocabulary comment, that we want people to grasp the right concept.
Higher skills. I mean, you may have those skills without having done that training, right? So
that's a great point. Great, thank you. And other comments?
I caution against basically developing two parallel systems. One, a framework for measuring training and its outcomes, and a separate one for measuring learning and education outcomes. They actually have to be the same thing.
Yeah.
And so the skills and competency taxonomy is probably what we're going for, both from the recruiting practice as well as from the education and learning and training practice. In particular, if we're moving towards a more stackable credential in the learning cycle of things or the education cycle of things, we actually want to ingest all that learning that came out of training and employer-provided training programs. And so there are good practices today in the military, in ACE, where you can attach credit to work-based learning that directly is transferable into degree programs or credential programs. And it's just a recognition that learning and the acquisition of it is occurring in so many different places today. And it supports the notion of that lifelong learning loop where it's not a one-and-done model anymore. You're now moving to kind of multiple times because the shelf life of those skills or competencies is shortening. And so the workers are continually having to go back. Sometimes they may come to an institution or a university. Sometimes they're acquiring it in employer-based education and training. Sometimes it's in military or a coding boot camp, whatever it is. And so that maybe it comes back really to the data transparency initiative. Like, it's actually a common taxonomy across competencies and skills that then becomes more universal across both of those. So,
one other point, if I could. Your point about sustainability to me is intriguing. And it gets to this pledge and looking upstream and a pipeline, pledge for obviously where I come from. These are younger kids that are going to be our future workforce, and starting to build that from a sustainability standpoint, but also good times or bad, we're going to come out of the bad times and we're going to need that skilled workforce. So somehow thinking in a sustainability way about a pipeline pledge so that we can start building the future now.
All intriguing ideas. Thank you.
Barbara, I want to just say one thing on small business than it is for the larger corporations. And we just did our training survey to find out exactly what our members are doing. And it obviously means different things. The small business owner rarely takes advantage of programs that involve money or tax-advantaged programs. They're almost always using time of the business owner and their coworkers. So I think this is something that we need to take into account as we try to quantify these training issues.
That's a perfect segue into Johnny's amazing numbers. Thank you, Juanita.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, yes, we were fortunate. I just want to give a shout-out to Dave Langdon from the Department of Commerce and Mary Ann Wanamaker from University of Tennessee, I think it was, who helped us with this research. We have an in-house group of about 20 or 30 of sort of PhD types, but they were supplemented with folks from higher ed and the government, Department of Commerce. So we looked at a couple of major themes. The findings are here, but we really wanted to understand how are employers categorizing skills training. And then what's training and what's development? We really realize you use those terms, kind of you say my training and development department, and like bifurcating what is one, what is another. We asked them how frequently do employers provide skills, compliance, and onboarding training. And to your point, it depends on the type of company you are. Some of them have significant resources like the major companies around the table, but more than half of the American companies are small and medium-sized employers, and so they have a different appetite for spending significant dollars. I remember being shocked when Jenny said they spent like $500 million or something last year, a year, on this work, and so smaller companies can't quite do that. So we really had to ask it and then really dissect the information by company size. The first thing that we did is we focused on three different types of broadly the definition of training. So we had onboarding training, which almost every company does. It's by nature. You bring on someone, they have to become acquainted with working. It may be as simple as where's the water fountain, where's the restroom, et cetera, but they have some type of onboarding. And then we have compliance training, which was all the rage, as you might imagine, last year coming after the Me Too. We really had to do a significant amount of discrimination work, et cetera, pay equity sorts of training, et cetera. So there's significant compliance training. And then when you really ask people how much true skills training and development they were doing, that was actually a small number. I mean, companies weren't investing. They weren't like the likes of Ginny and Apple, because you will hire so many people that's actually you can quantify and you understand why it makes sense for you to do it. So after we did that, one of the things that became very, very clear to us is that we need to really define what's considered training in each one of these categories, and then differentiate between upskilling and activities that are really job maintenance. And those are also sort of subtleties and nuances. The way that our research has come about and found is job maintenance focuses on training the employees to do their current job. It is just keeping the trains running on time, nothing particularly to enhance you, but to ensure. And by the way, if we introduce the technology, then we teach people to do that, but it's still the same job. That's not developing them. And then upskilling is going to focus on training the employees to prepare for future jobs. And they're not the jobs of a day or two from now, but 3 or 4 years from now. And thus, Jim, your point about the pipelining exercise and bringing that through the community colleges and the higher education space. So as we asked these questions, we had to really start working on language so that we could better understand it. Employers seem to be clear on what constitutes onboarding and compliance training. They really struggle on this broader issue, or the third category of skills-related training. What we found in our research is that the majority of employers, not surprisingly, can track what it costs them. The outcome, not so much. They'll do it like, I know I spent this much money on it, and the big question is, but did that work? And to what end? And so one of the things that you'll see from the research, medium-sized companies, actually right in the middle, are more likely to track indirect costs. Because, and I think a little bit of small company reality too, because they're thinking about the cost of sending you out to training. What business am I not chasing? What customer am I not satisfying or serving? And so there are not only the cost of paying for the $1,500 course in an airplane and a hotel, but what are those sort of opportunity costs of having you not focused on the business? Another finding was that 89% of employers, regardless of size, track employee participation. Again, an aha for us is we're measuring activity as opposed to, results. Did it make a difference, and are we meaningfully driving the population? So what we found is while big numbers are being bandied around and people are really committed to this, we're not sure that they're being focused in a smart way and that we're getting the most and ultimately improving the workforce, the collective workforce. A couple of observations I'd like to point out from this slide that stood out to me is 55% of employers do not offer apprenticeship programs to their employees. So more than half don't do it. And again, I was surprised at the level of sophistication of medium-sized companies. That stat was, especially in small and large size, the large companies don't do it, the small companies don't think they can afford it. The medium-sized companies understand they have to. It is a way for them to stay in the game, is that they have to do it. So it was really a surprise to us. The other one that stood out is, again, over 50% over to the right side of employers track direct financial costs and some indirect costs for all of it. But again, very few are saying, did it work? What are the outcomes? Finally, on the right-hand side is the small-sized companies are less likely to measure, again, the impact of skills training on the employees and on the business. It was just an interesting distinction between does it benefit the employee versus what benefits the business. All in all, what we have come to is that we think we need to get some better answers around how do we define training versus development and what types of training, and then we need to figure out how to measure outcomes. Is this all going to work? There are a number of companies who question, all of us went out and we invest in universities. You mentioned Visa University. The big question is, did it pay off? And so increasingly what we found is there are many who doubt, who are questioning quietly whether or not it's worth the investment. And the biggest aha from some of the research anecdotally was, why should I prepare someone who's then going to leave me and go work at Home Depot? what's in it for me. The better prepared I get someone in this job market, the more marketable they are. So is this really a good investment for my organization? I appreciate, it's like air conditioning in the city. It's nice, but I'm paying the bill, and I want to make sure that this room is. So that was the biggest aha.
And we're working, CEA is working on a report because this is a notion we have to debunk.
That's
right. That this is an investment that really primes the worker to then seek another employer. And actually, we've found exactly the opposite.
Yes, exactly.
Countries and cultures that prioritize this type of investment from the private sector, the retention rate of those employees is actually much higher. There's a sense of commitment which increasingly is lacking and has changed generationally with the last. So in an effort to keep us on time, and we have around 15, 20 minutes before we have to wrap up, I'd love to just open it up on all four of these pillars to any of the areas where people would like to ask questions or add comments and just have a free discussion now.
For a couple of thoughts, as we're talking about the employee, it's pretty important that we have an ongoing conversation with the employees.
That's right.
A lot of companies today do an annual survey or they do a biannual survey, and are you satisfied? Do you like your manager? How's it going out there? But we have found through this surveying process where you measure, manage their trainings and how they're doing in these learnings, this conversation with the employee where you can get that immediate response and feedback. You're no longer beholden to whether a middle manager somewhere in the company is good or bad. You actually get the feedback directly from the employee, and you can sort through that information. Employees are 80% more likely to stay with a company that has an ongoing conversation with them than a company that doesn't even know who they are. So that's just one thing. This experience gap, if we're talking about growth here, if companies just kept the customers they already have, they'd have $1.6 trillion more in their coffers. So the point is, how are you going to keep the customers you already have and get some new ones? I think this idea of training and focusing on people and connecting the people inside these companies to the folks outside the company is kind of a pretty important curve to get right. And again, we find that when customers stay with you, it's because you have an ongoing conversation. Companies lose customers when they survey them when it's renewal time and they haven't seen them for 3 years after they sold them something. So this ongoing dialogue is pretty important. So what we're learning. And finally, something simple, like the training budget. The first place a lot of companies go to cut cost when they're trying to make their quarterly numbers is they wipe out the training budget. It might not be a bad idea for a group of esteemed leaders like this to basically make the pledge that in our companies and the ones that we're trying to initiate in the process, we'll never cut the training budget. So whatever that is, no matter what the difficulty is, you wouldn't go to the training budget or the education of your people to actually hit financial numbers. If we believe that people are the most important thing and the American worker would benefit greatly from the education, then why cut the training budget?
I think across all four of the groups, Brad, I think that all of us have to be cognizant too is our work will only be great work if it's scalable and sustainable. And I know that one of the things that we did in Apple were when we started on coding education, we tried to put our folks out in some schools to do this. And, of course, that doesn't really work because it's not scalable and it's not sustainable. And as we tried to start reaching more people, we started working with the community colleges. And the community colleges are an incredible asset that's probably underappreciated in the country. We're now in 85 systems. So even a huge, and we did all of this in a year, basically, from the curriculum development to the training the teachers, and the community colleges are a lot more nimble than the four-year colleges. and now there's thousands of students that are taking classes already. And so this will act as an annuity, and build on itself and compound. And so I think thinking about people that we can partner with like that is really important for each of the groups to think through, because it will then live far after we are.
Tim, I think you're exactly right on that, because the key for us is to get involved in the curriculum.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what we need as businesses. They can't develop the curriculum that is required, and that is the sustaining element. I think you're absolutely right.
Go for it, Jay. And let me speak a little bit from the community college perspective. Yeah. Thank you, Tim, for your comments. We've had two initiatives that we've started this spring along this line that I think are very important. First, I want to mention what we just had here a few weeks ago, which was called the Kentucky Manufacturing Going Pro Signing Day, where we had over 400 manufacturers in the state come to the tables with 2,600 of our graduates in the manufacturing-related programs, and the graduates and the employer sat at the same table and signed their contracts for going pro in manufacturing, because we feel like we had to raise the level of importance of a career in manufacturing, and Kentucky is really trying to position itself as the manufacturing state in the union. And so that was a very successful. We had media. We did it all on the very same day in May with all 16 of our colleges and all 400 of these employers in participating. So it was a great event. Another way to get that underrepresented group back into the workforce, those that maybe are either undereducated or underemployed, are those individuals without a GED or high school diploma. And so we've started this spring a partnership with our GED providers called the GED Plus program, where the individuals without a high school diploma or GED can come to college and go ahead and enroll in a career and technical program while they're working on their GED, and the goal is for them to earn their GED and a first-level certificate within 4 months. And the governor provided a scholarship program for it called our Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship to help offset the cost for those individuals who normally don't qualify for the Pell Grant. So those are the type incentives that can really work. And the third thing I want to mention is how we've structured our marketing campaign around the theme of a better life. Because if we're to attract those individuals who are sitting on the sidelines, you have to show them that there's a value in the education they're getting. So we've had testimonial stories from individuals who've come back to college, going through the community college, and how that's going to help them not only improve their life, but their family's life in getting a career that can take them forward. And our theme is a better life for a better Kentucky.
Yeah, I agree with you about bringing people in from the sidelines. The labor force participation rate is key for the small business community.
Yes.
Because if 2 of every 3 new jobs are in small business, the people who were coming back in from the sidelines are more than likely going to come to work for small business.
Right.
So the labor force participation rate is really important here, as Johnny mentioned.
So if that's true, I think it would be worthwhile for all 4 groups to maybe get together and get our baselines and vernacular straight across 4 of us earlier than later, because I think for us to understand what the pool is that Johnny's going to finally work with the Department of Statistics to tell us, but I actually think that could help us a lot if we got the same vernacular and then the same baselines. Our work would be more sustainable because it'll be connected. And the second thing maybe that would help us here is, Jim, you mentioned this, maybe each one of us has to consciously go look at, I'm going to use the wrong words, the youth pipeline and the upskilling side of this, because they really are different as you go after them, and I think each of our initiatives have to attract or have to deal with both ends of this, or we're going to be a little bit lopsided. And I just think the others have done some great work on baseline. I think, Tim, you and I probably should steal from their work and our work group should do a little bit more work on baseline probably, but I think it will be helpful given everybody else is kind of zeroing in on the pools that we're talking about, the word of skills versus training or credentials, or I think if we all latched on, I think we'll be able to scale more. So,
great suggestion. And Governor, you were...
Yeah. We can't scale.
Yeah. With the signing on ceremony, do that in high school, do that as a freshman, make a big deal out of it, bring the employer in and have the kids stand there and do the signing. So I think that is such a great concept that we're all doing to just really highlight the opportunities that exist, but, we need to start sooner and let them see and help bring them back into the process. So, but just the common language, our military men and women with the MOS, because we didn't understand how that aligned, we were causing them a lot more problems than we needed to, and there's another great asset that we have. And so it's critical, and I think I'm really interested, Johnny, in finding out what you said you even learned additional barriers to second chances and bringing those individuals back into the workforce. So I'll be really anxious to hear what those are, because we need to also be looking at that.
Mary,
I'd like to actually follow up to the governor's remarks about that participation group that we are underutilized right now. We did a coding program, and at the end we had a number of single moms, very successful, and they came out of it, and they had reached that, what we call in Charlotte, the benefits cliff, where they could get that job, but they would lose their child care subsidy. So we need to figure out an incentive to make it possible for them, and whether or not, when you look at this long term, that employee will be valuable and committed to you for decades. But that graduation of that skill level and the ability to keep that child care is an immediate decision, and I'm not sure which group it goes into, but it's very real if we're going to change the non-participation rate. And the issues are, we can figure out transportation, we can give bus passes, train passes, but child care, especially for women and sometimes often men, you have to look at the family situation, and I think that we have to give some focus on how to incent somewhere that gap time until they go from earning 35 to 45, which then makes up that child care subsidy difference. That benefits cliff is very real.
And we've been talking about it too long.
We have been talking about it.
We'll take it in. I think Tim and I could, in the policy part of our group, we keep hearing this about that cliff, and there needs to be a graduated.
It has to, phase it out. Don't phase it out from underneath them. Help them sustain it and phase it out.
It will prevent us from utilizing every person with talent.
One of the other issues that obviously there are a lot of structural issues we've discussed. Child care accessibility. We're working really hard to make it more accessible. We enacted the single largest block grant of the child care and development tax credits to the states in the most recent omnibus. Fought really hard to secure that. Obviously, doubling the child tax credit. Transportation, an issue we continue to look at. The cliffs is an issue. Occupational licensing is a big issue. A lot of this is state and local, so we need to utilize forums like the Governors Associations to continue. You were just at the White House last week, Governor, and we were actually talking about these issues that impede mobility. But if we step back for a second, I think one of the things that this group can do in a tangible and generate real results on, and Ginny, you and I have spoken a little bit about this, but if you are a mid to late career worker, which is the most difficult category in some ways because of time limitations, because of mobility restrictions, if you are a mid to late career worker who has lost a job or needs to acquire a new skill in order to maintain their existing job or continue to work, what are the pathways and how can we leverage? There's a lot of great high-tech companies at this table who will share anecdotally stories about how you don't need a 4-year college degree to work in IT or work in cybersecurity. What are the jobs that the digital or not so digital world have available for us today, for Americans today, if they find themselves in a position where they're unable to move? Maybe it's because they own a home and they can't sell it, so they don't have mobility, or their family's near them and helping them raise their children. So there has to be a better way for this group to think about, okay, so here are the pathways.
flexible hours of time you can learn. These are the programs you can take that would accommodate. This is the wage substitution, the potential that are feasible for somebody at a later phase in their career who doesn't have the same flexibility as somebody in the earlier point in the pipeline. So that's just one suggestion that I think the private sector could really help inform us. These are the tracks that are viable, and this is how long it would take, and this is how it could be done. And we could share that with the public. Secretary.
Two things based on the discussion. As to those who are worried that if they do training, the people will get hired away, you ought to point out to them the logical conclusion from that is you should only have terrible employees and then no one will hire them later. Most people won't find that the right solution. The other thought I had, to dramatize the fact that training, especially apprenticeship training, is an investment, I think we ought to push the accounting standards people to reflect it as an investment and amortize it over a period of years. Every bit as much a capital investment, and it would help, especially a lot of the public companies. For tax, it should still be deductible, just like it is, but I think it would focus everybody much better to call it the investment that it is.
I agree. Excuse me.
That would change.
While we're doing all this, I think there is something that the large companies should look at. You all have a large number of subs. Now, some of them are big, self-sustaining, capable companies. But more and more, we're trying to focus on a lot of the subs we have for different reasons. For example, one of the great things going on in all of our companies right now is cybersecurity, and how do we protect our information? How do we protect our current activities? How do we, and it's pretty easy to, if everybody's working for you and you've got strong supervision, you can work that. But you've got a lot of subs who have little or no idea how to do the easiest things to avoid problems. The same thing is true on a lot of the ideas of training that have been discussed here, or bringing on people, skills development, community colleges. While you're at it, while you're doing all this, you know, you can indirectly affect your smaller subs, and it'll save you a fortune, and it'll save you all kinds of problems. And, by the way, you'll get a lot more value for what you're paying those guys. Big companies really are the major hires, in many ways, of very small companies. I mean, if you look at, I'll use companies that are not here, Boeing, Caterpillar, you know, they've got some place you're talking about 20,000 subs. And all you sort of have to do is make a copy and send it to them, a lot of this stuff. And if you can help those small companies gather this information, take advantage of these opportunities, and if you can indirectly train them on issues that are a major difficulty for major companies, because no matter how hard you work, if they're not in the system, you're in trouble. And I don't know where we put that, but I think somebody should think about it. You get a tremendous multiple without spending the money twice.
Well, we appreciate that, Tom. And, Secretary, if you want to just wrap us up.
Sure. Well, I thank everybody for your participation today, and especially for your commitment to improving the career prospects of millions of Americans. It was really impressive to hear the progress made by each of the working groups. So I thank you for your time and dedication. And I thank Tim, Jenny, Bill, Governor Holcomb, Johnny, Al, Barbara, and Mike for leading the 4 working groups. And I thank you, Governor Reynolds, for your participation in the Multiple Pathways Working Group. Each group has selected well-defined focus areas, and we're eager to see the specific recommendations you'll prepare in the coming months. Before outlining next steps for the board, I invite anyone here, if there's one last-minute urgent thing that you have to get out, do it, because otherwise it's going to end very quickly. Seeing no hands, I'm going to continue. The most significant step for each group is to identify specific, immediately actionable recommendations within their individual focus areas. And between now and the September 18th meeting, I hope every one of the groups can prepare at least one formal action recommendation for the full board to adopt and implement then on the 18th of September. If there are more recommendations, that's fine, but I think the key is to have something really actionable. But each of you already have the ready help from our federal staff, including Rosemary Lahosky from the White House and David Langdon from Commerce. We all stand ready to provide whatever support you need as you continue with this work. So I thank you again for your dedication to America's workforce. We hope you have a great summer, and we look forward to our next meeting in September. And with this, we adjourn the meeting. Thank you.